This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Hello, welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. My name is Harry Wilkinson, and this is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events, happenings in the world, happenings in politics, happenings in international news, the environment, technology, all of the things that we hear about during the course of our week and our day, all of the things that may come at us from various places, including our new technologies, the 24-hour news cycle, whether it's new media or just coming from the radio in your car as you're driving to work. We are increasingly bombarded with information, some of which we need, some of which we don't really need, most of which I would say we probably don't really need. But we take a step back from that, and that allows us to actually go deeper into what's going on around us. This show, my perspective on it, comes from a metaphysical perspective. The idea that everything we are sort of experiencing in the outer, if you will, that we think is in the outer, is actually ourselves creating something at a higher level, something for us to experience, something for us to have a moment with, something that eventually, ultimately empowers us and reconnects us to a sense of something more, to our higher self, to divine mind, if you will. I use that phrase a lot, you'll find. I think for some it may be a little easier to hear than the G word. Those who have difficulty with traditional religion, those who have difficulty with belief in a deity, may find a concept like divine mind easier. I like it because it helps explain what I mean in a way that the word God doesn't. Because when you use the word God, or when someone uses the word God, well, what do you mean by God? What does that word mean to you? Because God has different meanings to different people, depending on what their background is, depending on what their take on religion is, what their religion might be. For some, if you say the word God, you are immediately talking about an old man with a beard who runs everything. That's a concept of God. I think it's a wrong concept, but it's a common one. If you think about it, it's kind of childlike, and doesn't reflect at all a sense of spirituality. But for many people, when they talk about religion and they think about God, that's what they're referring to. And the atheists are quite right to be repelled by that. You should be. It's, I don't believe, a credible, and I'll use that word and you'll see why in a moment, a credible concept or illustration of spirituality, of the divine aspect, if you will. But it's short and it's quick and it's easy. And it's very easy to kind of push things off, including your own sense of spiritual understanding and responsibility. It's easy to push that off on some old man with a beard who's in charge of everything. But that is certainly not the truth of things, I would say. Or, depending on your belief, again, you mentioned the word God. Well, then you're talking about the Son that he apparently gave life to, who gave his life for the sake of the world, basically. So then you're talking about a prophet, a very, very special human being with divine powers that come directly from God, but that no one else has. And this is kind of a fallacy too. If you're talking about the Christian aspect of it, if you look deeply, you'll see many quotes from Jesus stating exactly the opposite. He says, these works and many more you will do. So while Jesus might be leading the way, he's also saying you too have these abilities. So anyway, not to stray too far from what I'm talking about, because I'm not talking about religion. And this is not a religious show. Never has been, never will be. We talk about religion, particularly religion as it affects happenings in the world, but also as it affects our spiritual sense, our sense of spirituality. Our sense of spirituality is a sense that I have said frequently on this show is something we all have. In fact, scientifically it's been proven through a study of genes and DNA. There is a gene called the VMAT2 gene that we have, which is the gene that so far researchers have pinpointed as being the gene that kind of makes us able to have transcendent experiences, that allows us to feel something greater than just ourselves or our physical body. So, and you can look that up. You can run a web search on VMAT, VMAT, the number 2 gene, and you can read all about that. I say it's a sense, just like hearing and seeing, tasting. It's part of the human experience to have a spiritual nature. Now, what we do with it, that's an entirely different story. Some may reject it entirely, and that's what makes it different from other senses, because you wouldn't reject one of your other 5 senses, your sense of smell or taste or hearing or whatever. But with your sense of spirituality, there are many people who just, they don't believe it, they don't know what to do with it, they don't feel very connected to it at all, and much of that may have to do with the way that the concept of spirituality is talked about and presented in our society through religious belief that many people find not to be credible. Back to that word again. And I'll tell you why. So just to kind of get busy on this topic. If you've been listening to the news this week, you've heard that word quite a bit. Credibility. Credibility. And it struck me. In hearing this word over and over again, it sort of puts you in almost a meditative frame of mind when you hear a word constantly repeated. You tend to think of it in a meditative sense, almost like a mantra. And when you do that, it sort of brings you into perhaps a greater understanding of the word, or a greater understanding of the concepts behind it. And that leads to a greater, perhaps a greater wisdom? I don't know. But I was thinking about credibility. And we heard that word this week in relation to the drama that's going on in politics right now over the nomination of a judge to the Supreme Court, who Judge Kavanaugh, of course, who has been accused of sexual misconduct. Obviously not a new story. It happened over 20 years ago with a gentleman by the name of Clarence Thomas and a woman by the name of Anita Hill. So, not to get into that, I'm sure that you've heard enough of that this week. But I did want to talk about credibility for a moment, because I wanted to think about that in a different context. Because people were waiting to hear from the testimony of these people, whether they were credible or not. And I began to wonder, what makes something credible? Particularly something that someone says. What makes a person credible? And what makes credibility different from just belief? Well, to believe in something involves really an act of faith. The belief in something is something that you hold true regardless of whether there are empirical support systems and information that verifies it. And it struck me that the concept of credibility is kind of belief, but belief masquerading as some kind of a scientific inquiry. You look at the person's face, you look at their tone of voice, you look at the emotion that appears to be welling from them, and you say to yourself, well, this is credible. Well, what makes it credible? What makes you believe that? Because it strikes a chord inside of you. But it's no different from faith. In the long run, it's no different from faith. You saw something, and it seemed credible to you because it resonated with you. Something inside of you said, that sounds true. But there's still no empirical evidence to confirm or deny. So, in thinking about credibility, that led me to the word incredible. Incredible. Now, you'd think, if you didn't know English very well, or you were just learning it, you'd think that incredible would be the opposite